The wind cut through the empty streets like a blade, and the air smelled of damp asphalt. My jacket barely shielded me from the chill, but I wasn't thinking about myself. I had just finished my late-night shift at the gas station, exhausted, barely making enough to cover rent, but my son, Liam, was waiting at home. That thought alone kept me moving. As I turned the corner near an alley, I noticed a woman standing under a flickering streetlight. She was trembling, arms wrapped around herself, her soaked dress clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her high heels looked out of place on this part of town. I could tell she didn't belong here. I hesitated. People around here weren't always who they seemed to be, but something about her, maybe the desperation in her eyes, made me stop. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice came out hoarse, barely audible over the wind. She didn't answer immediately. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. I sighed and shrugged off my only jacket. It was old, frayed at the cuffs, but it was warm. I draped it over her shoulders. "Take this?" Her wide eyes met mine, and for a moment, she just stared. Then, almost as if she was afraid to accept kindness, she clutched the jacket tightly. Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I should have walked away, should have minded my own business. But I didn't. Something about her, about the way she looked so lost, kept me standing there. "Do you need a ride somewheres?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. She hesitated. "I just need a moment." I nodded, shoving my freezing hands into my jeans pockets. "All right. Just be careful around here." She gave me a weak smile. "You too?" I turned to leave, feeling the bitter wind bite at my arms now that I had given her my only jacket. But I didn't regret it. I had Liam to think about. I needed to get home. As I walked away, I had no idea that this small act of kindness was about to change my life forever. I kept walking, but my mind stayed with that woman. Something about her eyes haunted me. They held the same exhaustion I saw in my own reflection every morning, the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles no one else saw. The cold bit into my skin, reminding me of my decision to give up my only jacket. Stupid? Maybe. But I couldn't ignore someone who looked that lost. I reached my apartment, if you could call it that. The paint peeled from the walls, the stairs creaked like they might collapse under too much weight, and the heating barely worked. But it was home. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could. The dim light in the corner flickered, and I saw my son, Liam, curled up on the couch with a thin blanket. My heart ached. He stirred as I stepped in. "Dad." His sleepy voice was soft. "Yeah, buddy. Go back to sleep," I whispered, ruffling his hair. He yawned and snuggled deeper into the blanket. "Did you eat?" I swallowed hard. Yeah, of course. I hadn't. I'd spent the last of my cash, making sure he had dinner. Liam was only 7, but he was too perceptive for his age. He didn't believe me, but he was too kind to push it. I sat down on the worn-out chair, staring at the ceiling. Bills. Rent. Groceries. It was always the same, an endless cycle of barely scraping by. I sighed, closing my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. All I could think about was that woman in the cold. The next morning, I woke up early to get Liam ready for school. I packed his lunch, just a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the best I could afford. "Dad, your jacket?" Liam frowned, looking at me as I pulled on an old hoodie instead. "It's fine," I said quickly. "I'll get another one soon." He didn't say anything, but the worry in his eyes made my chest tighten. I walked him to school, then headed straight for my second job at the auto shop. Grease, sweat, and the stench of old tires filled the air as I stepped inside. "You're late, Ryan." My boss, Todd, barked. "Sorry," I muttered, grabbing my gloves. "Sorry doesn't pay the bills," he snapped.
No, it didn't.
Nothing ever seemed to. The hours dragged, but I kept my head down and worked. I was used to the exhaustion. It was just another day. Or so I thought. As I wiped my hands on a rag, ready to leave for my night shift at the gas station, a sleek black car pulled up outside. And then she stepped out. The woman from last night. Only now, she didn't look lost or vulnerable. She looked powerful, and she was staring right at me. My stomach twisted. What was she doing here? She approached me with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes scanning the garage like she didn't belong here, which, let's be honest, she didn't. You work here? Her voice was softer than last night, but there was something unreadable in her tone. I nodded, wiping my hands on my jeans.
Yeah.
You all right? She hesitated, then reached into her purse. Here. She pulled out my jacket. I took it, confused. You came all the way here just to return this. She smiled slightly. It's yours, isn't it? I shook my head. I didn't expect it back. You helped me when you didn't have to, she said, her gaze steady. I don't forget things like that. Something about the way she said it sent a chill through me. I should have said thank you and let her go, but I couldn't help myself. You never told me your name. She hesitated. Scarlett. Something about that name felt too polished, too perfect. But I didn't press. Ryan, I said, offering my hand. She shook it, briefly, almost cautiously. Then, before I could say another word, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, my gut telling me this wasn't over. And I was right. That night, as I stood behind the gas station counter, fighting off exhaustion, a familiar car pulled up. Scarlett stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. I frowned. You lost again? She smirked. No. I raised an eyebrow. She took a deep breath. I want to offer you something. I stiffened. Look, if this is about last night, you don't owe me anything. It's not about debt. Her voice was firm. It's about opportunity. I crossed my arms. What kind of opportunities? She studied me for a moment, as if deciding whether I was worth the risk. I own a company. A very successful one, she finally said. I blinked. Okay. I need someone I can trust, she continued. Someone real. Someone who doesn't play games. I scoffed. Lady, I work 2 jobs and barely sleep. I don't have time for games. Exactly, she said, a strange intensity in her voice. I stared at her. Come work for me, she said simply. I laughed.
Yeah, sure.
Let me just quit both my jobs and jump into some mystery position for a woman I met in the rain. She didn't laugh. I don't make offers twice, she said quietly. Something about her tone sent a shiver down my spine. Think about it, she said, slipping a business card onto the counter. Call me if you're interested. Then, just like that, she was gone. I stared at the card. I should have thrown it away, but I didn't. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a job offer. This was a turning point, and my life was about to change forever. The card burned in my pocket all night. I turned it over in my fingers, staring at the embossed letters, Scarlett Monroe, CEO.
CEO.
Not just some random rich woman. She was important, powerful, and for some reason she was offering me a job. I didn't call her. Not that night. Instead, I went home, collapsed on the couch, and tried to convince myself that this was crazy. But I couldn't shake the thought. The next morning, as I walked Liam to school, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. Hey, Dad. Liam's voice was small. Yeah, buddy? You ever wish life was different? I stopped. He looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with something far too heavy for a 7-year-old to carry. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He kicked at a rock. Like if you didn't have to work so much. If we had a house, maybe a dog. My chest tightened.
Yeah, bud.
I do. Me too, he whispered. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep my emotions in check. That night, after my shift, I pulled out my phone, and I called Scarlett. The next morning, I was standing in front of a skyscraper, feeling like an idiot. I didn't belong here. The people walking past me wore $1,000 suits, and I was in my best pair of jeans, a pair with a tiny rip in the knee. Before I could second-guess myself, a man in a suit approached. Mr. Carter's? I nodded slowly. Miss Monroe is expecting you. He led me inside, through a sleek lobby that smelled like money. Everything was polished, pristine, perfect. I felt wildly out of place. Then the elevator doors opened, and there she was. Scarlett Monroe. She looked different in the daylight, poised, untouchable, like she owned the world. "Ryan," she said smoothly, as if she'd known all along I'd show up. "You weren't kidding about the whole CEO thing," I muttered. She smirked. "Come on." I followed her through glass-walled hallways, past people who shot me curious glances. Finally, we reached her office, a massive space with a view of the entire city. She gestured for me to sit. "I'm going to be direct."
Good.
"I hate games." She smiled faintly. "I need someone to handle things outside the corporate world. Someone with street smarts. Someone who won't flinch when things get complicated." I frowned. "What kind of complicated are we talking about?" Her gaze darkened. "You helped me when you didn't have to," she said. "Now, I want to help you. But this job isn't normal." I exhaled slowly. "Define not normal." Scarlett leaned forward. "Are you willing to do whatever it takes to secure a future for your son?" My stomach twisted. Because we both knew the answer. I didn't say yes right away. I should have walked out. But the truth was, Scarlett intrigued me. And I was too damn tired of barely surviving. "Tell me what I have to do," I said finally. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "Meet me tonight. Downtown. I'll send you the location." I raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." Her expression remained unreadable. "Consider it a test." I had no idea what I was walking into. But for Liam, I'd take the risk. That night, I left him with our neighbor, a kind old lady who watched him when I worked late shifts. Then I followed Scarlett's instructions. The location she sent led me to an upscale lounge. Way out of my comfort zone. Inside, Scarlett was waiting. But she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her. Sharp suit. Cold eyes. The second I stepped in, his gaze landed on me. "You're the guy?" he asked. I didn't like the way he said that, like I was being evaluated. Scarlett gestured to the seat next to her. "Ryan, this is Victor. He's the reason I need someone I can trust." Victor smirked. "Let's see if you're worth trusting." I had a bad feeling about this. But it was too late to back out now. Victor slid a folder across the table. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside were pictures. Of men. Some looking powerful, some looking afraid. I glanced at Scarlett. "What am I looking at?" She didn't answer. Victor leaned in. "Scarlett tells me you don't scare easy." I forced myself to hold his gaze. "That depends on what I'm supposed to be scared of." He grinned. "Good answer." Then he pointed at a particular photo, one of a man in a designer suit. "I need you to deliver a message to him." I stiffened. "What kind of message?" Victor chuckled. "The kind that makes sure he listens." I looked at Scarlett, waiting for her to call this off. She didn't. That's when I realized this wasn't just some job. This was something else. Something dangerous. And I had just walked straight into it. I should have left. But when I thought about Liam, about his question, "Do you ever wish life was different?" I knew I couldn't. Scarlett met my gaze, silently asking if I was in or out. I exhaled. "Where's this guy?" Victor's grin widened. "Now we're talking." Scarlett's face remained neutral, but I caught the briefest flicker of something else. Concern? I wasn't sure. But as I took the folder, I knew one thing for certain. I had just stepped into a world I didn't understand. And there was no turning back. The name on the file was Derek Lawson, a wealthy businessman with too many secrets. Victor slid a sleek black envelope across the table. "Give this to him. Make sure he reads it. And make sure he understands there are consequences if he doesn't." I clenched my jaw. "And if he refuses?" Victor smirked. "Then you convince him." Scarlett hadn't said a word. I turned to her. "What exactly am I walking into?" She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "An opportunity, Ryan. One that could change your life." I stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Then, with a slow exhale, I took it. Because this, whatever it was, felt like my only chance at something better. Tracking down Derek Lawson wasn't hard. Rich men like him stuck to their routines, especially ones who thought they were untouchable. I found him at a high-end restaurant, sipping whiskey like he had nothing to worry about. I walked right up to his table and set the envelope down in front of him. His eyes flicked to it, then to me. And you are? I leaned in slightly. Someone who's giving you a chance to make the right choice.
His jaw tightened.
I don't take threats from errand boys. I grabbed his untouched glass of whiskey and poured it onto the table, watching the liquid soak into the pristine, white linen. His face turned red with rage. Do you have any idea who I am? I met his glare, unflinching. I don't care who you are. I care that you read the letter. For a moment, I thought he'd call security. But then he picked up the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. And whatever he read, it drained the color from his face. Good. Message delivered. I walked out of that restaurant with my heart pounding. Scarlett had been right. This wasn't normal. I had just stepped into something dangerous, something bigger than me. But the crazy part? It felt good. For once, I wasn't the one being pushed around. I wasn't the desperate guy begging for a break. I was the one in control. Scarlett called me later that night. I heard you handled it well. I exhaled. If by handled, you mean pouring whiskey all over a table, then yeah. Nailed it. She chuckled. Derek got the message. That's what matters. I rubbed my forehead. What the hell did that letter say? A pause. Then something he needed to hear. That was the moment I realized Scarlett wasn't just rich. She was powerful, and I had just become a part of her world. The next day, Scarlett invited me to meet her in person again. This time, she wasn't offering a job. She was offering a future. You could walk away now, Ryan, she said. But I think you know that you don't want to. She wasn't wrong. Then what's next? I asked. She smiled. You prove you can handle more than just delivering messages. And that was how I found myself standing outside another expensive office building, waiting to meet the next person on her list. This time, it wasn't just about handing over an envelope. This time, I had to negotiate. The man's name was Warren Hale. Another big shot. Another guy who thought he was untouchable. I walked into his office, unannounced. His secretary tried to stop me, but I didn't slow down. Warren looked up, startled. Who the hell are you? I sat down across from him. Someone who's here to give you an option. His eyes narrowed. You've got 5 seconds before I call security. I smirked. Go ahead.
Call them.
But if I walk out that door, so does your last chance to make this right? His hand hovered over the phone. Then he hesitated. Bingo. He knew why I was here. Talk, he muttered. So I did. And by the time I left that office, he had agreed to everything Scarlett wanted. I was starting to understand something. Scarlett didn't just need a guy to handle things. She needed someone who could command respect. And I was proving I could be that guy. That night, Scarlett called me again. You impressed me today, she admitted. I didn't know why, but that meant something. I had spent my whole life being overlooked, struggling just to be seen. Now, I was earning respect. But there was something else too. Something dangerous. Because the more I stepped into Scarlett's world, the harder it was to remember who I had been before. And the scariest part? I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. A few weeks passed. The money was better. Liam had new clothes, better meals, a future that no longer looked like a dead end. But then one night, my phone rang. It wasn't Scarlett. It was Victor. Time to prove how far you're willing to go, he said. And just like that, I knew. I had crossed a line. And there was no going back. Victor didn't wait for me to answer. Meet me at the docks, he said, then hung up. I clenched my jaw, staring at my phone. I had been expecting this, the moment where the job stopped feeling like a favor and became something darker. But what choice did I have? I had a son to feed. And this life. It was giving me more than any dead-end job ever could. I grabbed my coat and left. The docks were empty when I arrived, except for Victor, who leaned against a black SUV, arms crossed. He grinned when he saw me. I was starting to wonder if you had it in you. I didn't reply. What's the job? He opened the SUV's trunk. Inside was a duffel bag. Heavy. I didn't ask what was in it. I already knew. You're going to deliver this, Victor said. No questions. No deviations. Just follow instructions. I stared at him. And if I say no, his smirk didn't fade. Then we'll know you're not cut out for this after all. I exhaled slowly. Scarlett had warned me. But this was a test. One that could make or break my future. I reached for the bag. And just like that, I took another step into a world I couldn't escape. The address Victor gave me led to a mansion in the hills, the kind of house only the filthiest rich people owned. I parked at the gate, gripping the duffel bag tighter. Before I could second-guess myself, a security guard approached. "You're expected." "Go in." Expected? That set off alarm bells in my head. I drove up the winding driveway, my pulse pounding. The front door opened before I even knocked. And there, standing in the doorway, was Derek Lawson. The same man I had threatened weeks ago. His gaze flicked to the bag in my hands, then back to my face. "Come in," he said smoothly, as if we were old friends. I hesitated. Then I stepped inside. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about power. I set the bag down on the table. Derek poured himself a drink, watching me like a predator sizing up prey. "You work for Scarlett now," he mused. "She must really trust you." I didn't respond. He smirked. "You should be careful, Ryan. You think you're playing her game, but she's playing you." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I kept my voice steady. "You got a problem with hers?" Derek took a sip of his drink, then set the glass down carefully. "I have a problem with anyone who thinks they're untouchable." My gut told me to walk away. But before I could turn, two of his men stepped into the room, blocking the door. Derek's smirk deepened. "Let's find out if you're really as fearless as Scarlett thinks you are." I knew this was a setup. But it was too late to back out now. I had seconds to react. Derek's men moved toward me, and I knew they weren't here to talk. I swung first, catching one of them off guard. His head snapped back, and I grabbed a chair, smashing it into the second guy's ribs. Derek cursed, knocking over his drink as he backed away. "You idiot, do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Yeah," I growled. "Not dying?" The first guy recovered fast, lunging at me. I barely dodged in time, landing a solid punch to his gut. But there were two of them, and only one of me. The second guy grabbed me from behind, locking his arm around my throat. My vision blurred. I struggled, kicking against the floor. Then a gunshot. The grip around my throat loosened. The second man collapsed. Scarlett stood in the doorway, gun in hand, her expression unreadable. "Let's go," she said coolly. I gasped for air, stumbling toward her. Derek was pale. "Scarlett, you..." She didn't even look at him. She just turned and walked away. And I followed. Because for all the danger I had faced tonight, one thing was clear. Scarlett Monroe was more dangerous than all of them. The drive back was silent. Scarlett kept her eyes on the road, her grip on the wheel tight. I exhaled. "You set me up." She didn't deny it. "You had to see for yourself," she said. "This world isn't forgiving, Ryan. You either survive or you don't." I clenched my jaw. "And what about Derek? He's not going to forget this." Her lips curled slightly. "No, he won't." That wasn't reassuring. I stared out the window, my mind racing. I had almost died tonight. And yet, I wasn't scared. If anything, I was more alive than I had ever been. And that terrified me. A few days later, Liam and I were having dinner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A deep voice rasped, "Walk away, Ryan, before it's too late." Then the line went dead. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Someone knew my name. Someone was watching me. And I had just made a very dangerous enemy. I didn't tell Scarlett. I should have. Instead, I kept my head down and kept working. But the warning stayed with me. And when I came home one night to find my apartment door slightly open, I knew I had made a mistake. I stepped inside, heart pounding. The place was trashed. Drawers open. Furniture overturned. Someone had been looking for something. And then I saw it, a single photo left on the kitchen table. A photo of Liam. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a threat. I called Scarlett immediately. "We have a problem," I said. She met me within the hour, her expression unreadable as she looked at the photo. Then she met my eyes. "You're not walking away, are you?" I shook my head. Scarlett nodded. "Then we end this. Together." For the first time since this started, I wasn't just fighting for survival. I was fighting for revenge. Scarlett's face was unreadable as she stared at the photo of Liam. "You know what this means, don't you?" she asked. I clenched my fists. "Someone's coming after me." "After him," Scarlett exhaled, setting the photo down carefully. "It's Derek. He wants to remind you that no one crosses him without consequences." My jaw tightened. "Then we end this." Scarlett studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Meet me tomorrow," she said. "I'll handle this. But you need to be ready to do what it takes." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Because I already knew this wasn't going to end peacefully. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me tense. Every shadow felt like a threat. Liam sensed it too. He clung to me as I tucked him in, his small fingers gripping my shirt. "Are we safe, Dad?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Of course, buddy. Always." But as I sat in the dark, gripping the gun Scarlett had given me, I knew that was a lie. And if I didn't act soon, I was going to lose everything. Scarlett wasn't playing games. When I met her the next day, she already had a plan. "Derek is expecting you to be scared," she said. "We used that against him." I raised an eyebrow.
"How?"
Her lips curled into a dangerous smile. "By walking into his world like we own it." I didn't like the sound of that. But I also knew this was our only shot. We met Derek at a private club. The kind of place where men like him made deals over $1 million glasses of whiskey. I walked in first, my heart pounding. Scarlett was right behind me, calm as ever. Derek looked up from his seat, smirking.
"Ryan."
"You should have listened to my warning." I pulled out the photo of Liam and tossed it onto the table. "You made a mistake," I said. Derek's smirk faded. "You don't belong in this world, kid." I leaned in. "Neither do you. Not anymore." Scarlett stepped forward. "We made sure of that." Derek's face paled as his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and whatever he saw made his hands tremble. His accounts? Frozen. His protection?
Gone.
Scarlett had dismantled him before he even knew the war had started. "You can walk away now," she said smoothly. "Or you can lose everything." Derek's eyes burned with fury. But he knew he had lost. He grabbed the photo of Liam and crumpled it. "This isn't over." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Yes, it is." And for the first time, Derek looked afraid. It was over. Scarlett had made sure Derek was finished. His empire was gone. His influence shattered. I should have felt relief. But as I stood outside, the night air cold against my skin, I realized something. I had changed. I wasn't the desperate single dad working 2 jobs anymore. I was something else. Scarlett stepped beside me. "You did good tonight." I looked at her. "And what now?" She smiled. "Now? You decide what kind of man you want to be." I thought about Liam, about the life I wanted for him. And I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning.